The Starfleet life with the USS Dauntless. Are you brave enough to be a Starfleet officer? Do you have what it takes?
Greetings. I am Admiral Swart, Commanding Officer of the USS Dauntless, and this is the briefing with the Admiral for stardate -250877.1. I am the Admiral in question, and today we're going to be talking about the reason we exist. But before we do that, let's do the housekeeping, which is to say that we record these sessions every Tuesday at 12:30 South African Standard Time. If you are an active duty member of the Dauntless crew, you're welcome to join us for these recording sessions in the Dauntless Discord in the Screening Room channel. If you are not an active duty member of the Dauntless crew, we try our best to stream these live to YouTube at the same time. You're welcome to try and view it there. And if you'd like to get involved in the live conversation, please do so. There's typically a lively chat in the Discord, and often in YouTube as well. If there is something that you'd like me to see, if you have a comment or a question that you'd like me to address when we get to the Q&A section at the end, please make sure that you @tag me in your query so that I see it. There's typically a lot of back and forth in the conversation, and it's difficult to keep track of all of that when I'm scrolling through when we get to that section. So if you @tag me with your question, then I can make sure that I see it when the time comes. If you are watching this after the fact, because of course, middle of the day on a Tuesday is often a difficult time for a lot of people who have day jobs, that's perfectly acceptable. You are free to watch this on YouTube and also on Facebook. It's uploaded there later the same day. Please feel free to drop any comments or questions in the comment sections on either of those places, or if you'd like to do it privately, you can contact me directly via email, Discord, Telegram, Facebook Messenger, just about anything except WhatsApp. Right. Yes. So who are we and why are we here? So that's a pretty major question, but the short version, which we usually cover in this section of the video every time, is that the Dauntless is a future-focused action and advocacy group that is at its core a Star Trek fan club. The Dauntless is a chapter of Starfleet, the International Star Trek Fan Association Incorporated, which is the largest organized fan-run Star Trek fan community in the world, as far as we know. Thousands of members and hundreds of chapters in dozens of countries around the world. As a chapter, we are one of the local groups of that organization, and we are the local group that is based in Cape Town, South Africa, but we have a largely online existence, which means that a number of our members are in cities and towns all over the place, not only here in Cape Town. We are obviously not a real starship, even though that is our metaphor, that's our theme, that's our representation online. The starship is not a real ship. The starship is the ideological cocoon that binds us together as a group and identifies us as what we are. We derive a lot of the thematic and design elements about our physical representation in the world from that fictional Star Trek, which is typical for chapters of Starfleet International. The Dauntless's mission is to promote the values and philosophy of Star Trek as depicted in Star Trek, and we'll go into a lot of detail about what that is soon, to a wider world in the hopes that we can help move our present day world into a future which more closely resembles that depicted in Star Trek. So, without further ado, let us get to the purpose of today's briefing, which is to discuss the reason that the Dauntless exists. So, to start with, why Star Trek? So there are countless franchises out there, entertainment franchises. Star Trek is essentially an entertainment franchise, which is owned by Paramount CBS. And many of them are equally, if not more, brilliant, imaginative, and beloved by their respective fan bases. I don't like the term fan base or fandom. It kind of implies things about us which are not strictly accurate, but it's the terminology. So we'll just stick with it for now. Something like Star Wars, Stargate, Battlestar Galactica, the Marvel comics, DC comics, Doctor Who, all of these are fine entertainment franchises in their own right. They all have something to say. They all offer something to their fans. Many of us are fans of those franchises too. But the thing that sets Star Trek apart from all of those, I would argue, is that Star Trek isn't just about escapism. It's not just about imagining interesting worlds or exploring fun stories or even being inspired by noble deeds of fictional characters. It's about aspiration. So not inspiration, aspiration. The thing that sets the Star Trek universe aside from all of those other fictional universes is that it is at least intended to give us something of a roadmap of depicting a world in which we might someday end up living, a possible future that if we play our cards right in the here and now and we make the right choices today, we could end up in a world very much like that depicted in Star Trek. And that's what we're for. That's why the Dauntless exists, is to try and figure out what those choices are that we can make now in order to set those wheels in motion and push towards that optimistic future as depicted in Star Trek. So we don't have anything negative to say about Star Wars or Battlestar Galactica or Doctor Who or Harry Potter. Those are all great. And we enjoy those and we love those. But none of us, or at least as far as I know, none of us have, or nobody has set up a fan organization quite the same as Starfleet International that maps to any of those other entertainment franchises. I think the closest that I've seen exist is the 501st Legion, which is a Star Wars costuming fan club. Now they do charity work and things like that too, and that's great. But they are first and foremost a costuming club. So they require of their members that they build uniforms and costumes of a certain level of standard, and then once they have those constructed, then they can use that to go out into the world and do good things, and that's cool, that's great. But what they lack and what we possess is that core fundamental ideology that exists at the heart of Star Trek, that we recognize and that we subscribe to and that we think is important. They have to bring their ideology in from outside, because frankly, the 501st Legion is an Imperial themed club, and the Galactic Empire in Star Wars, they don't do good things, but the 501st does. So they have to actually corrupt the core ideology of their franchise in order to make charitable work in their club work. We don't have to do that. Our ideology, our franchise, the core vision and mission depicted in our franchise of choice already gives us the roadmap that we can use to be a force for good in the world into the future. Another distinguishing characteristic that Star Trek has that isn't as prominent in most other similar franchises is that Star Trek's core is not conflict, but cooperation. It imagines a world where humanity has overcome all of those things: poverty, war, division, disease, crime, not because it's easy to do so, but because it's necessary to do so. That's the only way that we advance to the next stage of our progress, how we grow as a species, how we advance as a society, as a world. And that vision of a united, hopeful future is, I think, unique. I can't think of any other examples in popular culture where that core is as prominent or even exists at all. Other fandoms gather around interesting and fun characters, cool battles, especially sort of the eternal battle between good and evil is a common trope in a lot of, I don't like to use the word trope, that also sounds dismissive, is a common theme in a lot of entertainment franchises, and that's interesting. That speaks to something about who we are as people, about the human psyche. But we don't do that. We gather around ideas. In fact, the concepts of good and evil barely exist at all in the Star Trek franchise. They are subjective at best. Every time we encounter an evil force in the Star Trek universe, eventually they will turn around and cooperate with us, because that's what humanity does in this optimistic future, is we cooperate with people, even people who look like at first they're going to be our enemies. Later they become our friends. Even the most formidable antagonists in the Star Trek universe, Klingons, became allies. The Dominion, well, the Dominion itself was kind of defeated, but aspects of the Dominion were turned to the side of the Federation. The Borg ended up being on our side. This is just how it works. So it's not that there's good or evil, it's that there are protagonists and antagonists. There are people with competing interests. There's our interests, which is that of humanity, that of the Federation, and there are people who have interests that disagree with ours. But if we work hard enough, if we try hard enough, we can eventually find common ground with those antagonists, and we can find a way to cooperate with them on projects in the future. Star Trek goes further than just that. It also asks questions about morality, about identity, technology, and what it means to be a human. And every episode challenges us to think, essentially, what does it mean to be better than we are? I think that if there is a theme that spans across virtually every episode of Star Trek, it's that. What does it mean to be better than we were before? What does it mean to be better than the people around? Well, that's not quite what I mean. What does it mean to grow and to improve and to become a better force for good in the world? And here's the thing that matters most, right? This is what separates us, the Dauntless Starfleet, from just regular fans. And that is that it's not just about liking Star Trek, it's about knowing that Star Trek is important. And I say knowing, not just believing, not just feeling, not just thinking, knowing that Star Trek is important, because it is. It is important. It's important enough that we want to emulate it in our lives in various ways. We want to bring about a future that resembles that depicted in Star Trek. We want to adorn ourselves with the colors and symbols of the characters that we see on the screen. We emulate it in the way that we address each other, the way we organize our institution. And it's not just Starfleet that has grown to emulate Star Trek. There are even present-day military institutions have been inspired by the way that Star Trek organizes itself and have started to emulate it, even though Starfleet, the fictional Starfleet, is inspired by those same military institutions. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. That's a long story. But suffice to say, Star Trek is inspirational not only to us as explicit Star Trek fans, as a Star Trek fan community, but to the wider world, because it matters, because it's important. And there's another truth as well, though, and that's what brings me to the core of what we're talking about today, is that if we're going to live by these ideals as depicted in Star Trek, we need to stay rooted in their source. We need to cleave to that original material that all of this springs from. And that is why we watch, we study, we discuss, we engage in the original Star Trek material. Because the episodes and films aren't just stories, they're our canon, they're our doctrine, they're our common texts, they're our sacred documents. And without that shared grounding, the philosophy that we adhere to drifts. And I'm sure you've seen instances of this happening. Even within Star Trek fandom, you've seen, as I have, I'm sure, people who drift from the original source material, from the philosophy depicted therein, and who kind of lose their way because they no longer embody or imbibe or assimilate that core material. With it, we remain anchored in what Star Trek actually teaches, not just in what we vaguely remember. Now, it's worth mentioning at this point that the Star Trek canon is a colossal body of work. Close to 1,000 episodes and or films at this point. It's many, many hundreds of hours of viewing. And not all of it is the same. It's not homogenous. It's quite heterogeneous. Each series that has been released has been a product of its time. The original series was very much rooted in the zeitgeist of the 1960s, the Next Generation of the 80s, Enterprise of the early aughts, Discovery of the 2010s, and so on. But what all of that does is it helps to diversify the points of view through which we can look at this original philosophy, this original grounding work, this inspirational material that we have cleaved to. And we can acknowledge and understand and recognize that there are different ways, different perspectives of looking at this core value, at this this beautiful idea that Gene Roddenberry had. And none of those ways of looking at it are wrong. They're all different, but they're all just as good. They're all just as interesting. And it's okay, by the way, to have preferences. You are allowed to prefer this particular way of looking at it over that particular way of looking at it. But also, it's not, we can't really be saying that this is better than that, objectively speaking. We can say that this show might be better than that show in terms of production value, in terms of writing, in terms of performance, lighting, music editing, title sequence, all of those kinds of objective measures. But overall, we can't really be saying that one is better than the other because they're all part of a whole. They're all part of the same body of work. They're part of the same canon. And that's why canon matters. And I keep using that word. What is the canon? In case we're not familiar. The canon is a term that we've borrowed from religious scholars who talk about sacred texts like the Bible. Bible is not just one book. It is an anthology, if you will, of different books from different genres written over centuries and rewritten and edited and adjusted and modified. And the set of books that goes into the Bible is an agreed upon canon of work. And it's not agreed by everybody, by the way. There are different volumes of canons that are agreed upon by different religious institutions, different branches or different, what's the word? Never mind, I've forgotten the word. It's fallen out of my head. But different branches of the Christian faith have different beliefs about what the canon should look like. And that's okay. They're bifurcated in that way. Ours is a lot more cohesive because we have the benefit of not being in the position where we as fans get to decide what the canon is or is not. The canon is a body of intellectual property that is owned by a legal entity, CBS Paramount, and they actually get to dictate to us what is or is not canon. And we have to then take what they've given us and then we make the best of that. Canon is, at this point, because it changes, it is all the live action films and television series. So that includes the original series, The Next Generation, the first 6 feature films, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, the 3 Kelvin timeline movies, the 4 Next Generation era movies, Discovery, Strange New Worlds, Picard. Did I say Strange New Worlds? And then the several animated series, the original animated series, Lower Decks, Prodigy, and the Short Treks series, not the very short treks, just the regular short treks, and the Section 31 film. That is the canon. And unless I've forgotten any, that's all that canon is. As of now, that's the full extent of it. All of the other stuff, even if it's produced by CBS Paramount, novels, comics, games, all of that stuff, audiobooks, none of it is canon. That is all non-canon. Now, that's not to say did I not mention Prodigy? I think I mentioned Prodigy, but it's in there. All of that stuff, that extra stuff is just extra. None of it matters. None of it is part of canon. And it's not to say that it doesn't have value. A lot of it can be very good. A lot of it can be very engaging and fun. I personally enjoy a lot of the writing in Star Trek Online. I think it's very clever. But all it is essentially is it's fan fiction. Some of it is licensed fan fiction. Most of it isn't. But that's all it really is. And because we have that official canon that is dictated by Paramount CBS, that is really the body of work that we should be focusing the bulk of our attention on in terms of studying, because that is the core work that we derive our philosophical guidance from. And when our philosophy starts to drift, when we start to get blurry edges around what we should or shouldn't be doing, it's that canon, that body of work that we can look back at and recenter ourselves. And yeah, because the non-canon stuff it's commentary. That's all it is. And it can be fun. And sometimes it even, elements that are introduced in the nonfiction stuff make their way into canon. I think Star Trek Online is probably the largest non-canon work in terms of amount of material that's made its way from non-canon into canon came from Star Trek Online. And that's one of the reasons why it's fun to play, because you can kind of get a sense of, it's almost like a teaser of what might make its way into canon someday. But it remains non-canon until we see it in canon. But that is why we are a Starfleet crew. We're not just a casual meetup group or a genetic sci-fi Facebook fan page. We are an organized fan institution community centered around the Star Trek canon and the philosophy and ideology contained therein that binds us together. Star Trek is the reason that we wear these uniforms. It's the reason we call each other by our official titles. And it's the reason that we, as the Dauntless, exist. So what do we do? Pardon me, I need a sip of my beverage before we continue. So what do we as the Dauntless do to facilitate this recentering of ourselves within our guided philosophy, our chosen ideology? A few things. First, and possibly the most important, in fact, these are all very important. They're just important in different ways. So the first one that I'd like to talk about is our watch parties. Every Friday, our crew has a rare opportunity, which is to get together in Discord, in our screening room, this very channel where we're hosting this event right now. And if there is a new episode of Star Trek that has been released that week, we watch the episode together. Now, Star Trek episodes don't come out every week. There was a time not that long ago, a couple of years ago, where we had a new episode of Star Trek almost every single week. That pace of release has slowed significantly. Now we only get 1, maybe 2 seasons a year for the foreseeable future. That could change. Hopefully it will increase, but you never know. But when there are new episodes being dropped, during that run of that new season, at the moment, as I'm recording this, we're looking at a current season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. So it's ongoing now, that every Friday night at 1900 hours South African Standard Time, the active duty members of the Dauntless crew are invited, strongly encouraged, to join us in the screening room here in the Dauntless to watch that episode together and to have a chat about it while we're experiencing it together. Now, I say that this is a rare opportunity because it's not something that every fan can do. Especially here in South Africa. So for those who might not be aware, South Africa is not considered a prime territory by CBS Paramount. They do not prioritize distributing their new shows to Africa in general, South Africa in particular. And so it's not all that often that we have direct access to new episodes of Star Trek as they are released. So we have to acquire our episodes through means that I'm not going to explain on air. But then we make those episodes available to our crew members so that as Star Trek fans, as active members of a Star Trek fan community, we do not have to wait longer than about 24 hours to enjoy a new episode of Star Trek virtually as it's released. And we have that time lag of 24 hours or so because our method of acquisition of these new episodes can sometimes take a little longer than we would like. So we just, to be on the safe side, we make sure that we have those watch parties on a Friday instead of on a Thursday, which is the day that the episodes are released just about everywhere else in the world. And again, not every fan gets to do this. Most Star Trek fans watch those episodes alone. In their living rooms or in their own time, on their laptops, on their phones, sometimes months or even years later. But we get to make it an event, a communal moment that we can share together as an active Star Trek fan community. And we can watch that new episode virtually as it's released. We can thrill in that expanding universe as it unfolds with each new week going by. It's not even something that is all that common in Starfleet International. Most chapters that I'm aware of don't do these weekly watch parties with new episodes. They all require that their crew members watch the episodes in their own time, and then maybe they'll discuss it at some point in the future. We, aboard the Dauntless, are very fortunate to have this watch party system set up that allows us to enjoy these episodes together. Not only watching them together, but also getting to discuss them together in virtual real time. I know that the Discord screening room setup has been a little janky for those people using the mobile system a little bit lately. Hopefully Discord, our platform provider, will improve that situation for us soon. But nevertheless, it's still possible. Even if all you have is a phone or a tablet, you could still join us and watch the episode together, even if it's a hassle to get involved in the conversation while that's happening, which again is a rare privilege. Other South Africans will have to wait months, years, or possibly forever to be able to watch that episode, just because it's not available here, sometimes ever. For example, Star Trek Discovery seasons 4 and 5, in fact, I think possibly 3, 4, and 5, if I remember correctly, have never been released in this country. They're years old at this point, probably will never be released legitimately here. So the watch party isn't just about watching a television episode. It's about participating in the ongoing story of Star Trek as a crew, as a community. And when we watch those episodes together, we aren't just fans consuming media, just sitting, vegging out and absorbing it. We're shipmates sharing a voyage. And that analogy is not a mistake. It's not an accident. It's easy to forget how extraordinary it is. 50 years ago, fans could only dream of new Star Trek being made again. In fact, not even 50 years ago. I remember 15 years ago when it looked questionable if there would ever be another Star Trek again. Okay, 17 years ago. 17 years ago, we didn't know if Star Trek would ever be made again. It looked like it wasn't going to happen. It looked like the franchise was dead. But we get to live in a time where there's always new Star Trek on the horizon. It might not be every week, it might not be every month, but it's certainly every year, and it's growing, and it keeps going. So we have a continuous stream of these fresh stories, and we have the privilege of experiencing them together in real time. We don't have to wait. We don't have to linger. We don't have to forget about it and hope to avoid spoilers for months or years on end. We can just do it. We can just log in and participate in it together. And it's not trivial. It's the heart of what it means to be a living, breathing fan club like the Dauntless. So when you join a watch party on a Friday night with us, you're not just showing up to watch something on TV. It's not just a regular watch party. It's not a movie night. You're affirming that you're part of this crew, that you're part of this voyage, and you're part of that future that Star Trek is still creating, and the future that we hope to build, using that Star Trek philosophy as the anchor, as the source of power that generates us into that optimistic future. The other mechanism that the Dauntless provides to facilitate this recentering of ourselves within our ideology is the daily devotionals. So the daily devotional it's not an official Dauntless project. It's a personal project of mine. I've done a whole briefing like this on the daily devotional, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about what it all is, but for those who might have missed it, the daily devotional is the idea that we watch an episode of Star Trek every single day. There is no definitive sequence in which we watch the episodes, but because it's my project, I get to decide the sequence, and the sequence that I've decided is that we watch them chronologically in the in-universe chronological order. So when we start with the earliest in terms of in-universe time, and we work our way all the way to the latest one in universe time, and when we run out of episodes, we go back to the beginning again, and we watch them through all over again. And this is something that I've been doing as a fan for years. And it's when I say years, I mean decades. But a few years ago, I decided to share this project with the rest of the crew, and I have been doing so ever since. And what's fun about it now, well, so many things are fun about it, but what's interesting about it now and what sets it apart from when I began this project is that we no longer have a finite amount of Star Trek. Every time we get through the entire canon and go back to the beginning again, there's more canon to go through. And what that does is it's not just more stuff to watch. It expands the context of the rest of the material. We get to rewatch old episodes given that expanded context of new episodes. And I'll give you an example. This is a minor example. It's a trivial one. It's just the first one that popped into my head. In recent episodes of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, specifically season 2, there was an interaction between the young Lieutenant James D. Kirk and Lieutenant Laan Noonien Singh, in which he reveals that he is currently dating a scientist back on Starbase 1, and she is pregnant with his child. Now, we know based on the broader Star Trek context that he's talking about Carol Marcus, who is the scientist that we met as fans in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And there she is, significantly older. Kirk's son, David, is now fully grown and is a scientist himself. But this is now, we're getting a glimpse of that story earlier on. So it helps to improve that context of that later interaction. We also meant the Kelvin counterpart of Carol Marcus in Star Trek Into Darkness, but in that timeline, they don't have that relationship, so it's not as interesting. But what we didn't realize at the time, and what I only noticed in our daily devotionals a week or two ago, was that there is an interaction in one of the very first episodes of Star Trek, the original series, made back in the 1960s, called Where No Man Has Gone Before. It was actually the second pilot episode for the series. There is an interaction between Captain James T. Kirk, now sort of 5 years later, he's the captain of the Enterprise, and his navigator, Lieutenant Gary Mitchell, in which Mitchell admits that he was the one who, in his words, aimed a lab tech at James Kirk. And Kirk is incensed by this admission because he almost married her. Now we know, given that context, given the new context that Strange New Worlds has given us, that the lab tech that Gary Mitchell introduced Kirk to was Carol Marcus. Now we have a more comprehensive timeline for what was a throwaway line of dialogue made 50 years ago. Now we get to string those pieces together into an interesting little story. And it's a minor story, as I said. It's not that important to the greater narrative. But these are the kinds of insights that repeated and expanded context can give us into the wider story arc. So that's why we watch them over and over again, and why I believe that chronological sequence is the most useful way in which to consume that material. And the reason we do it daily and not sort of in bursts is that it helps, I find, for us to recenter our philosophical grounding if we have that daily injection of Star Trek. Now, realistically, nobody watches them every day, not even me. I sometimes am too busy to squeeze in an episode on any given day, especially since most of the series in Star Trek are 45 minutes long, and some days I just don't have 45 minutes to spend on a Star Trek episode. But that's okay. You can catch up once a week at least. I'll spend a couple of hours catching up on the episodes that I've missed out on. Sometimes I'll even watch a few episodes ahead because if I know that I'm going to have limited capacity in the upcoming days, so that it's averaging out at roughly one episode per day, even if it's not literally one episode per day. But ideally, one episode a day would be the preferred pace in which to consume these. And in order to share that with the crew, what I've done is I've set up a calendar dictating every episode that we're going to be watching on which day up until the end of the cycle, which is 2028, I think, is the end of the current cycle. And that episode is then posted automatically in the Future History channel here on the Dauntless Discord server with a link to the Memory Alpha page describing that episode, so that it serves as an anchor point where we can launch those discussions from. And when you watch that episode, you are strongly invited to contribute your thoughts and feelings and considerations and insights into that episode you noticed, experienced while you were watching. I try to do that every single time I watch an episode. So the devotionals then, they serve as a reminder that Star Trek isn't only something that we watch once a week in the watch parties. It's a philosophy and it's a lens through which we can view our world, a source of wisdom and of inspiration and aspiration. The devotionals invite us to pause, reflect, and carry a piece of Star Trek with us into the day. And while there's nothing wrong with watching Star Trek on your own and in your own pace, many of us first discovered Star Trek that way. There is something greater in studying it together, using a shared pace, a shared program, a shared routine. Watching canon in chronological order, again, the order doesn't really matter, it's just the order I happen to have chosen, but watching it in a shared order gives us a shared experience. It gives us a common language and a chance to ask and answer the same questions at the same time. And it makes our engagement deeper, more meaningful, and more memorable. It's especially valuable for crew members who haven't experienced all of canon yet, which is frankly a lot of people. Not everybody's watched all of Star Trek. I was an active Star Trek fan for a number of years before I managed to get through the whole of canon back then, and that was many years ago. but there is no definitive sequence in which to watch Star Trek. There's no logical place to start. There's no rational first place to begin. Okay, arguably there are a couple of incarnations of Star Trek that are designed to onboard new people. Star Trek 2009 probably. Star Trek Prodigy is definitely designed to help new viewers sort of ease their way into canon. But actually, it doesn't really matter. The best Star Trek episode to begin with is the one that's right in front of you. And that's whichever one is today's episode in the daily devotionals is the logical place to begin, because there is no better place to start than right now. And if you are part of our community, you're part of this family, jumping into that context with the rest of us and sharing that sequence with us allows you to take that journey with your shipmates, one episode at a time. You'll discover the same stories that others are discovering, sometimes for the first time, sometimes rediscovering new and interesting aspects about something that we've seen a dozen times before. And we get to reflect on the same questions and grow together as a crew. And that's why I've shared this program with the crew. That's why I do this every day. That's why I offer my insights to everybody and don't just keep them in the confines of my own head. They're not just busy work or background noise. They're a gift from me to you, a way for each of us to stay connected to the heart of Star Trek, and a standing invitation to join the journey side by side. So, Star Trek as our core mission. So when we watch, or when we gather for the watch parties and we reflect on our daily devotionals, we're doing more than just passing the time. We're living Star Trek together. These moments root us in that canon, in that core, and they remind us of the ideals that we aspire to, and they strengthen us as a crew, because that's why we exist. Not just to wear the uniforms and to socialize and play games together, although those things matter, they're important, but to be anchored in Star Trek itself. Dressing up and socializing are the core activities of our life together. They're what we do, but they're not our core purpose. They're not why we're here. They're not what brought us together. Our purpose is to gather around our shared ideological bonds, to keep Star Trek at the center of who we are individually and who we are as a crew. Star Trek is the hull of our metaphorical starship, of the USS Dauntless. It's that metal shell that keeps us safely together. It gives us structure and holds us as a crew, as one. But Star Trek is also our warp core. It generates the power, the energy that drives us forward, propelling us to do the important work that is our mission. Everything else we do, the camaraderie, the missions, the laughter, it flows from that center. If you take away Star Trek, we're just another social group. If we keep Star Trek at the heart, and we are a crew with a purpose, a future, and a reason to boldly go. So I invite you, come watch the watch parties. Come and join us on a Friday night. Engage with the daily devotionals. Not out of obligation, not because you have to, not because you're being required to, because you aren't. Not even just for the sake of the crew, to help build this community, to help build this family, but for the sake of your own personal enrichment, for your own mission readiness. Star Trek isn't only entertainment, it's education. It stretches our thinking, it expands our imagination, and it challenges our values. When we engage with Star Trek together, we gain more than just new episodes that we can refer to and think about and enjoy. We gain a wider perspective. We strengthen our ability to think critically, to wrestle with interesting ideas, and to see the world through a broader lens. And by doing it together, we form deeper social bonds, connections rooted not just in small talk, but in shared ideals and common visions of the future. That is the real power of Star Trek. It doesn't just unite it as a crew, unite us as a crew. It makes each of us a better person, more thoughtful, more connected, and more prepared to boldly go. Right, time for some questions. Let's see. I've seen a lot of Star Trek memes being posted. That is delightful. Let me scroll back up to the top. Good. Okay. Anything for me there? All right. We've got from Petty Officer Durand. I once made the point in film class that Star Wars is about po- pol- politics. I think that mean it's supposed to mean politics. Sorry, there's a typo there. Star Trek is about the human condition, existence, and the philosophies that being human address. I think that's a very good summation of that. I think that definitely sums it up. The only series that I've ever watched that came across to Star Trek was Farscape. Very different, not so human, but to me it also asked the uncomfortable questions of existence. Yes, I think that's a fair assessment of Farscape. I think it was great, especially the early seasons. I think it kind of lost itself in the later seasons a bit, but it started. It has a very strong start. Let's see. Anything else I need to see? Lots and lots of Star Trek memes, which is great. That's what I want. Wanda Shamali, what a closing statement, though. Good, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you. All right, fantastic. Okay, all right. My yeoman actually sent through some questions beforehand, so let's just go through those quickly. Why should we prioritize the new shows if some of us don't like them? So this is a question that's been happening since the 80s, right? With every new iteration of Star Trek that has come out, there have been fans of the previous iteration or iterations that have rejected it as being not my Star Trek, not sufficiently Star Trek enough, not the same. The Next Generation got a lot of hate for that reason. The Deep Space Nine got a lot of hate for that reason. So did Voyager, so did Enterprise, and every other iteration of Star Trek that has come to date has received a similar amount of hate for a similar reason. And my response to that would be, we don't have to enjoy every incarnation of Star Trek equally. I don't. I've got my favorites, and I've got ones that I have to grit my teeth and get through every time because it doesn't appeal to my aesthetic taste. But Star Trek is delightfully heterogeneous. It's different all over the place. Star Trek itself is as diverse as it asks us to be. And Star Trek is alive. It's a living, breathing, growing thing. The new shows are as much part of the canon as the original series, as the Next Generation, as Voyager. And if we only look backwards at the old classic Star Trek, which is some of the best Star Trek to date, I'm not arguing that it's not. But if we stop looking only backwards, we stop being a living crew. We don't have to love every episode, but engaging with it helps us to keep connected to the ongoing, growing story of Star Trek. And as I said, just the fact that a lot of the newer stuff is set chronologically before some of the older stuff, it helps to contextualize that older material in interesting, new, delightful, and exciting ways. Some of them are trivial, some of them are more important, but I think that matters. That growing canon, we can only truly appreciate it if we are experiencing all aspects of it, even if we don't necessarily love every part of it the same. I've got a question from Petty Officer Durand. Star Trek also evolves, and often us older generations need to understand that it's also creating space for new generations in a way that they can engage with. It remains Star Trek even if it doesn't speak to us personally. Yes, 100%. Not all incarnations of Star Trek were designed for the same audience even. Something like Star Trek Prodigy was designed for teenagers. Doesn't mean it's not still Star Trek. In fact, some of my favorite episodes in the whole franchise are from Prodigy because it's just delightful. But not every version of Star Trek is made for each one of us. But that doesn't mean that it's not still Star Trek and not still part of it, and it doesn't still matter as part of that core canon that we subscribe to. Next question. I prefer watching Star Trek on my own. Why should I join watch parties? Now, there's nothing wrong with private viewing, and I confess that I often prefer to watch each new episode on my own first before the watch party, just because I like to watch it undistracted. But the watch parties, they give us something deeper. They give us a shared experience. And when we see the same episode together at the same time, we gain a kind of common language. And for that moment, for those 45 minutes on a Friday night, we can reflect on that experience together. And that's what turns watching a TV show into crewmanship, into a family. Sharing that experience is very important. Doesn't mean you can't still do it on your own, and you should do it on your own if that's something that's important to you, but do it with us too. That also matters. Another comment from Commander Shamali. Also, the inside jokes. Yes, you see, that's exactly the kind of language that I was talking about. Is if we can share that experience, that helps us to develop a camaraderie, and that shared history is what inside jokes are made of. From Petty Officer Durand, alone viewing is better for binging. The watch party is great for the shorter shared experience. Yeah, I'd say that's fair commentary. If binging episodes is what you enjoy, then watching alone probably is better. Especially if you're a week behind on your daily devotional episodes and you want to catch up. Watching them alone is fine. It's perfectly acceptable. But if we're watching each new episode as that universe is expanding in real time, then there's no substitute for watching them together. Next question from Mayaman. Why focus so heavily on canon? Aren't the novels, games, and fan works also valid? Yes, they're valid. And a lot of them, by all accounts, are very good, as I said. Some of the novels and comics are some of the best stories that I've heard people talk about. I tend not to engage with those things because they're not canon, because they're not part of that continuity. To my mind, they kind of don't matter. Doesn't mean that they're not good, doesn't mean they're not enjoyable, and you're free to enjoy those. I'm not saying that you shouldn't. Just that canon is the stuff that matters, because canon is the core of it. Canon is what everything else is derived from. So canon should be our primary focus, not our only focus, but our primary focus. Start with canon and build from there. Don't leave canon behind and then get lost in the weeds. Canon first, then the Apocrypha. Because that way it allows us to stay grounded within that same truth. And I use truth not in that sort of scientific way there, but sort of in that kind of ideological truth. Staying grounded to that core, to that canon, that's what allows us to unify. Next question from the Yeoman. I haven't seen all of Star Trek yet. Will I be left behind in discussions? I would argue quite the opposite, because you're in a perfect position to learn, to catch up. There's no correct order to watch canon. As I said, you can watch them in release order, you can watch them in internal chronological order, you can watch them in order of preference. It doesn't matter. There are story arcs that it matters to for the narrative flow of those specific arcs. It's preferable to go from beginning to end. But if you understand where those narrative arcs are, then it's fine. And that's frankly why I prefer watching things in chronological order, because then the odds of you interrupting those narrative arcs are slim. But like I said, it doesn't really matter. Start anywhere. The best episode to start with is the episode that's right in front of you. And if you can share that with the people around you, so much the better. The people that are with you, they can help you get caught up. There are plenty of resources online. Memory Alpha is a delightful resource. So if you feel you've just watched an episode and you feel thoroughly confused, you have no idea what's going on, click through to Memory Alpha and read the synopsis. It's going to have all the contextual links that will help you get caught up within a few minutes. It's not going to be that difficult. In fact, even you can ask something like ChatGPT or Gemini to give you a synopsis of the concepts surrounding that episode, and it can bring you up to speed relatively quickly. Those LLMs are quite well versed in Star Trek, I found. They do sometimes hallucinate, and they do sometimes mix non-canon in with canon, but generally speaking, they're quite good. So joining in with the crew is a resource, not only because of the social reasons that we've spoken about, but also because the crew who have perhaps seen more of canon than you, and some of us who've seen all of it multiple times, will be able to help you to develop those contexts. So ask the question. People want to answer. If there's one thing that all active Star Trek fans have, is that we want to talk about Star Trek. So ask the question and we'll help you find the answer. All right. That is... Greetings, Lieutenant. Thank you for joining us. All right. Okay. I'm not seeing any more questions or comments, so I think we can draw to a conclusion there. And by the way of doing that, let me leave you with this. Our strength as a crew comes not from gathering, but from gathering around something that matters. It's our shared ideals, the vision of Star Trek, that binds us, guides us, and makes our time together meaningful. That is all for today. Thank you very much. You are dismissed. Swart out.